One day a man called his son, and he told him, "Son, after 45 years, I'm leaving your mama. Can't stand the arguments, the constant bickering, all the honeydews, the loveless marriage. I'm not going to stay anymore. Now call your sister and tell her." And he hung up the phone. The son, understandably, was quite distraught. Called his sister and said, "Dad just called and said he's leaving Mom." And the sister said, "He can't do that. You book a flight there. I will meet you there tomorrow." She hung up the phone. She called her dad. "Have you said anything to Mom yet?" "No." "Don't you say a word. I'm on a plane and I'm coming there and we're going to talk this thing over." And he promised he wouldn't say a word. Hung up the phone, and his wife came in and said, "Honey, who was on the phone?" He said, "It's the kids. They're coming for your birthday and they're paying for their own flights." You know, we like invitations. An invitation to come home, an invitation for dinner, maybe an invitation for a wedding, Thanksgiving. We like those invitations because it makes us feel wanted. Someone who reaches out to us and says, come to my house, come to my party, come to my gathering, come and be a part of this joyous celebration. We like those moments. We like things like that, and it makes us feel good. Do you know, of all the invitations that the world will ever be offered, there is one that surpasses them all. It is, in fact, Jesus' invitation when he says, "Come." This is his, what we often refer to as heaven's invitation. "Come unto me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden." Tonight, if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 11, the last few verses there, beginning in verse 28, as we look at heaven's invitation. We think about invitations, we not only do they make us feel good and make us feel wanted, but they draw us to something that is better than the normal everyday, right? And that's exactly what heaven's invitation does. It's drawing us to something better than we've ever experienced before. It is the celebration or the party of eternity in the presence of God, in union with our brother Jesus himself, so that we are in the presence of the glory of God himself. And so let's begin as we look at verse 28, as we see, first of all, the call of heaven's invitation. When he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." There is in this particular passage, or this one verse, some very meaty things that we ought to dive into. And the first one is the idea of coming. In fact, the idea is that there is something worth going to, we might say. And it's more than that graduation. It is, in fact, with Jesus. This is heaven's invitation to actually come. And it's when we think about that invitation, it is an active invitation to us. We go all the way back to God's design for mankind, that man might be in his presence because God wanted us, and man failed the test in the garden, and yet God made a provision for salvation, right? And when he said that I will put enmity between your seed and between her seed, he will bruise your head and you shall bruise his heel. There's this promise of something that is going to be better, something that is coming. And so throughout the ages, God has always made this invitation to those who are lost to come and find salvation or rescue or deliverance in him. The prophets, Moses, all of these men were representative of bringing heaven's invitation. And it's not as if this invitation, now that Jesus has died some 2,000 years ago, it is no longer active for us, but that invitation is something that continues for us today. It is God's active invitation. He wants us still, as he's always wanted mankind. And so we take that. But heaven's invitation is also personal. When he would say, "Come to me." What's interesting here is that when we think about who he's calling, he says, all who labor and are heavy laden, right? And so this from the Greek panta, all, everyone. Who's excluded from that? Nobody. And yet God does not invite groups. Come unto me, all who are men. Come unto me, all who are women. Come to me, all who are rich or all who are impoverished. Come unto me, all who live in the United States of America. God does not call groups. He calls individuals. And in particular, he identifies them as two kinds of groups, or all of those who, let me take that back. He calls all of those who are affected by two identities. One is all who labor, and the other is all who are heavy laden. The word labor here is we call an active participle. In other words, he's saying, and it's present tense. So come to me, all who are currently laboring. It's active because it's something that we are actually doing as well. And that's important because the strife and the toil that is happening to them is because of the work and the toil and the activities that they take on or that they do in this life. Have you ever worked so hard that at the end of the day every muscle was sore? That your feet ached? That you were so tired you weren't even hungry anymore? And all you wanted to do was sit and drink water. Have you ever done that? That's toiling. That's laborious, we would say. And that's the picture here, that you are under the burdens of laboring constantly. And I think in this context, he is talking about laboring of the life that you have been called to by God. Whenever we accept God's duty that he puts upon us to do, then in those times, at that time, we find ourselves sometimes burdened. Come unto me, everyone who is currently laboring or feeling that strife, and who are heavy laden. What's interesting here is he goes from the active participle to the passive participle. The passive participle means that all who are currently being made to carry a burden. And I think it's in the passive sense because he's talking about as you go about your life, you run into those who put burdens on you. Maybe it's your employer puts burdens on you. Maybe it's your family puts burdens on you. Maybe it's the obligations you have even in recreational things. You're the coach for the Little League baseball team. There are burdens that are put upon you. We might say our inability to say no, but we can't say no to everything, right? If we want to be the kind of Christians that God wants us to be involved in the lives of people in our community so that we can build bridges of relationship and bring the gospel of Jesus Christ, the saving gospel to them, we can't say no to everything. We have to say yes to some things. And when we say yes to them, there are burdens that are being placed upon us. So he says here, to come unto me, everyone who is currently laboring and therefore has a burden, and everyone who is heavy laden because people are burdening you down. They're giving you obligations, and you're receiving them. That's personal. Heaven's invitation is to those who feel the weight of the world upon them. But not only is it personal, it's essential. Think where we would be if God did not offer this salvation. If God did not offer this rest, where would we be? Oftentimes I hear when Christians have passed away and their family is talking about the long illness they went through. And you'll hear things like, I don't know how we could have done this without the church. Right? To do what? Well, because the Bible tells us that we're to bear one another's burdens. We share in that load. And those things that are difficult in this life, we are blessed to be able to share with God's people. It's essential that we share that burden with others, because that's where we begin to find rest. How do we make it through life, knowing that we are laboring and that we are heavy laden, if we do not have an advocate with the Father? And so heaven's invitation to us is essential. But it's also conditional. You know, the old illustration of the preacher talking about whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. And people say, well, that means that you're trying to work out your salvation. Well, I'm not trying to work out my salvation. I'm trying to meet the conditions. And the old preacher took out his car keys and he said, he sat them on the edge of the pew or pulpit, and he said, whoever will come up here and get these keys can have my Toyota Sienna. Notice I didn't bring my keys out because I'm not going to put my van in that kind of jeopardy from you people. No. But you can have it. And who among us would think, well, I just want the keys. I'm not about to walk up there and get it. No, we would all understand that the invitation is, if you will come and get the keys, you can have the van. Do you earn the van? No. Do you pay for it? No. Do you deserve it? No. But you've simply met the conditions. You can't expect the keys to come to you. You've got to come to the keys and take them. And so it is with the rest which God is offering. Come unto me, all of you who are laboring and are heavy laden, and then I will give you rest. We cannot expect to receive the rest, the salvation, and that's really what the rest is talking about, is the salvation that God gives. Secondly, the invitation is not just about the call, it's about those conditions. And you know, the Bible has always spoken of the ideas of condition to things that we do. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, he says in verse 29. And two things we notice here. One is after he says come, he says now come and take. Come and take. One of the first conditions is we've got to come forward and take those keys to get the van, or we've got to come forward and we've got to take the yoke which Jesus is offering us in order to receive the rest. Now here's what the great paradox is if I'm already laboring and I'm already heavy laden, why put me in a yoke of burden to add to it in order to get rest? You ever thought about that? Come and take my yoke upon you. Wait a minute, Jesus, I'm already feeling the weight of the world on me. Why should I take the yoke? You think about the yoke. This would have been very similar to what they were talking about at that time. And a lot of times we think of a yoke, we always think of one side of it, you know, that here's Jesus saying, now come and take this yoke so that you can be put into the plow. But most often, the yoke was a twin yoke. There were two sides in every yoke. And notice what Jesus says. He says, take my yoke. In other words, Jesus is already in the harness and pulling. And he says to us, come and get in the other side. Take my yoke. What's Jesus pulling? We might say that he's pulling the curse of being the Son of God and having gone to the cross, having been rejected and despised, having been killed. Maybe. But I think here in this context, Jesus is saying, look, I'm already in the harness pulling your burden. Quit trying to pull it alone. Come and get in my yoke. And then he says, learn. Learn from me. Some translations say, learn of me. And we might read that and interpret that Jesus is telling us, come and learn about me. But I think the ESV really nails it by enforcing this idea, come and learn from me. The idea is to learn away from me. In other words, take my guidance. If you've ever studied or read about those who worked with Georgia stock, with the ox and the plow, or with the horses, draft horses, and so forth, they would often take one that was very experienced, who knew the meaning of gee and ha, and yip and whoa. They would take a new young oxen, or maybe a young mule or horse. They would put them in the yoke together. And the young one didn't know the meaning of those words, and yet the old one did. And as they were training the young one, the old one was teaching the young one how to respond to the commands, how to respond to the reins, how to respond to the whip, how to respond to the burden that they were pulling on. And they would keep him in the young one in the yoke with the old one, the experienced one, until the young one understood all of the terms, understood what it meant to be a draft animal. Then he'd put the young one who is well trained now next to another young one that is well trained, and they had a new team. And eventually that young one would be old, and he would be used in a new yoke of oxen. Except this time he was the old one, and he was training the younger one. Jesus is already in the yoke. He's already faced the trials and the temptations. He's already had the burden that we are under. And now he is the old one. He is saying to us, come and put yourself in my yoke and learn from me. Learn the meaning of life. Learn the meaning of obedience. Learn the meaning of faithfulness and commitment and dedication and trust of God. Learn that life. And the burden that we pull becomes lighter. Because we're living as Jesus would have us to live. And that brings up this idea of comfort. As he finishes out verse 29, he says, "For I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Now, this life, sometimes we think it's just too hard. Adding more burdens of the yoke. Well, the promise is that I am gentle and lowly. In other words, God is not hooking us up to burdens that can't be carried. He's hooking us up to burdens that can't be buried alone or carried alone. But he's not saying to us, bear all the burdens by yourself. He never has said that. He says, I'm gentle, I'm lowly. And this is where you are going to find rest. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Verse 30. It's interesting when we think about this. It all begins with brokenness. When you have a young horse, it's never been ridden before, and you want to ride that horse, you know what you have to do? You break him, right? You break the horse. Or if you have an ox that's not used to or never been in a yoke, you know what you have to do? You've got to break them. Do you know what that means? I mean, we're not breaking their legs or breaking their back. What are we doing? We are breaking their will. You see, a young horse has been able to run wherever it wants to go. It is a free spirit. And in order to break that horse, we have to break his spirit, to break his will. Same thing with an ox. You've got a 2,000-pound animal here. If he's got a free spirit and does whatever he wants to do, who am I to stop him? Look, I'm a big guy, but I'm not 2,000 pounds. If an ox wants to toss me over the fence rail, an ox can toss me over the fence rail. I can't work with an animal that is a free spirit. I have to work with one whose will is broken and submissive to mine. And that's what breaking an animal is all about. What's Jesus saying? Come and take my yoke, for I'm gentle, I'm lowly in heart. Here's where you're going to find rest. My yoke is easy. He's breaking down our will. That's exactly where we need to be. It's what Jesus himself went through in Philippians chapter 2, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant, he being born in the likeness of men. What is he doing? His will is become submissive to the will of the Father. That's exactly where he is supposed to be. I'm reminded of the Psalm of David in Psalm 51, a broken spirit and a contrite heart, God, you will not despise. A what? A broken spirit. What is that? It's that we're broken of our self-will. And we're accepting the training of God. That's the invitation. And therein we find comfort. There's a lot of people in this world who are free spirits. Some of them want to come into the church and continue to be a free spirit. God doesn't want a free spirit. He wants a broken spirit. One that says, not my will, but your will be done. That's exactly where we are supposed to be. And when we do that, we gain the greatest strength. The strength, as Paul would say in Philippians 4, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. How wonderful is that? That there's an assurance that we can accomplish great things when we've broken our spirit and we've taken the Spirit of God. When we've broken our will and we take upon us the will of God. That's our comfort. And I know sometimes that's hard to accept. It's hard to accept in a culture of independence. In a culture where everyone is their own master, to say, I'm not going to be my master. I'm not going to let you be my master. I'm going to let God be my master. He is the one who oversees me. And you will find rest. That idea of rest there is the idea of salvation. The struggles of life, the burdens that we have, either from our iniquity or from everyday living, whatever it might be, there's going to be rest from those iniquity, from the toils of life itself. That's the great promise. In Psalm 95 and verse 11, God reminded them, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not inherit my rest. He was speaking of the nation of Israel when they were in the wilderness wanderings and they're murmuring and complaining against God. And he swore to them, if you act this way, if you continue in your free spirit, you will not enter into the rest. You will not have the deliverance and the rescue and the salvation that I am freely offering to you. In Hebrews chapter 3, ask this question, to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? Who is he speaking to? And then he answers the question, but to those who were disobedient. Who are the disobedients? The ones that I'll live life on my own time, in my own way. I'll do my own thing. I'll chart my own course. We are surrounded with that mentality, and it's tempting for us as Christians to give in to that mentality. But as tempting as it is, we have to understand it is wrong. Heaven's invitation is, give up your will and be broken for mine. Later in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 11, the writer says, let us therefore strive to enter that rest that no one may fall. Look, that rest is still an invitation to us, he's saying. Here we are members of the Lord's church. We have overcome the sins and iniquity of life through the blood of the Lamb. We know where we stand. And now he says, let us strive. Let us keep pulling the plow. Let us stay hooked to the yoke so that we may enter that rest. He says, my yoke is easy. His commandments are not burdensome. 1 John 5 and verse 3. Sometimes we run into people who think Christianity is just too hard. Listen, Christianity does take effort. Right? We have to understand that. It takes effort. Anything worth doing takes some effort. And Christianity takes effort. We have to make a choice. We have to study and know what is the right way. And then we have to walk in that right way. Right? If Christianity were easy, we'd do it by accident. Instead, we do it by choice. But as we study His commandments, we find that they're really not burdensome. They're just a little different than we would probably rather live if there were no conditions and no restrictions on us. But they're still easy in the grand scheme. And besides, God gives us all the strength we need to accomplish His will, Philippians 3. So the question comes tonight, so what? Well, what do you carry? What burdens are holding you down? What decisions are holding you back? What sins are plaguing your life? What's hindering you from answering heaven's invitation? If tonight you are not a child of God and you've been thinking about it, that's good. If your will is being broken even now by the Word of God, His Spirit is calling to you. And if you're ready to answer, all things are ready for you to obey the gospel. But if you're already a Christian, have you been striving to enter into that rest? Are you still hooked to the plow? Do you still feel the harness of Jesus on you? And if not, maybe you've escaped the yoke. It's time to come back and take His yoke upon you and plow all the way to that final row in heaven itself. If tonight you have a need to respond to His invitation, won't you come while we stand and while we sing?